Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in the history of the Appalachian Mountains. Before we start, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time you heard this story. We want to know where and when these documented accounts come in. There is a darkness in Ravens Hollow, West Virginia, that few outsiders have ever understood. This small town, which was hidden deep in the old folds of the Appalachian Mountains, didn't show up on maps very often, even during its best years in the 1,932. There wasn't much written down about what happened there between 1,937 and 1,953 until a Forest Service survey found a bunch of journals in 1968. The weathered papers, which were found sealed in a metal lockbox under the collapsed floorboards of what used to be the general store, told a story that was so disturbing that the official who found them reportedly asked to be moved right away. In 1903, the settlement of Ravens Hollow began in a normal way. Ezra Blackwood, a former coal prospector with big dreams, set up a small mining business in a remote valley where three mountain ridges came together like the fingers of a hand that was only partially closed. The area was very isolated. The closest town was 47 miles away by a dangerous mountain road that was blocked off in the winter. County records show that by 1925, about 38 families lived in Ravens Hollow. Most of them worked for Blackwood's mining company. Ravens Hollow's early years were like those of other remote Appalachian mining towns, tough but simple. Ezra Blackwood kept the settlement going by being strict but mostly fair in his rule. The mine made a small amount of high-quality coal, which gave the people a steady, if not large, income. The settlement's main buildings were a small general store, a community meeting hall, and a simple chapel. Isolation led to the expected self-reliance and insularity. But modern accounts talk about a community of hard-working people who worked together. Lawrence McCreary, who brought mail to the settlement once a month, from 1918 to 1931, wrote down what he saw in a journal that he later gave to the State Historical Society. "The Hollow folk keep mostly to themselves," he wrote in 1924. "But they're hospitable enough when approached properly. They don't talk too much, but they'll share a meal and offer a dry place to sleep if the weather turns." He also said, "They watch strangers carefully, especially those who ask too many questions about the deeper parts of their valley. Some places they make clear aren't meant for outside eyes." McCreary pointed out that the settlement's layout was different from what you would find in most Appalachian communities. Ravens Hollow was built in a perfect circle, with the mine entrance at the easternmost point, the Blackwood family home directly opposite on the western edge, and other homes arranged in concentric rings between them. Instead of clustering buildings along a central road or waterway, they were placed in a perfect circle. There was a strange stone pillar in the middle that McCreary said was about 8 feet tall, unmarked, and seemed to have no purpose. People would tip their hats when they passed it. The Great Depression made the already isolated community even more self-sufficient. The mine kept running, but at a lower capacity. People relied more and more on hunting, gathering, and small-scale farming. Ezra Blackwood's health was getting worse at the same time as this time of trouble. His son, Solomon Blackwood, took over the mine, and by extension, the whole community. Solomon had rarely left Ravens Hollow, unlike his father, who had gone to school in Pittsburgh and stayed in touch with the outside world. People who knew him as a child said he was a solitary, intense young man who was strangely interested in the mountains themselves. Walter Gaines, a geologist who visited the mine for a short time in 1932, wrote in his field journal that the younger Blackwood speaks of the mountain ranges as if they were living things with plans and awareness. His knowledge of the local geological formations is impressive, but he uses strange words that sound almost religious. The journals that were found said that Solomon was a tall man with a lot of energy. Geneva Harwick, who was the settlement's record keeper from 1932 to 1941, wrote, "Mr. S. has a way of standing so still that one almost forgets he occupies space at all until he speaks. The sound always startles. His eyes never seem to blink." A photo in the County Historical Archives shows Solomon Blackwood standing on the porch of the general store. He was tall and thin, with deep-set eyes that seemed to absorb light instead of reflect it. After his father's death in 1936, Solomon ran the community in a way that was similar to how Ezra had done it. The mine kept running, but Solomon didn't seem very interested in making more money or increasing production. Instead, records from the mine site show that he changed the focus of his search from known coal seams to what he called deeper anomalies in his notebooks. In the winter of 1937, the first sign that something was wrong appeared. The journals record a number of strange events that happened after Solomon came back from a 3-week trip into the deepest parts of the wilderness around him. He had left alone in late October, and he hadn't told anyone where he was going or why. People noticed right away that he was acting differently when he came back in mid-November. "Ez came back yesterday. Something is different. He talks about things that can't be seen," Harwick wrote. At dinner, he talked about geological formations from the deep mountain that I know can't exist based on what we know about science. He talked about colors that don't have names. Orville Cassidy, who ran the general store in the settlement, wrote down his own thoughts in a ledger that was found among the recovered papers. S came in today for supplies and stood in the middle of the store for almost 10 minutes without moving or talking. When I asked if he needed help, he turned to me and said, "It's listening through me now." His voice sounded like a lot of voices layered together, which I've never heard before. He left without buying anything, Cassidy said. Later, I saw him standing by the central stone, hands pressed against it, forehead touching its surface for over an hour in the falling snow. In the months that followed, Solomon made what he called community improvements. He chose 7 people to be on the town council himself. The mine's administrative building was where they met after dark, and the meetings often lasted until dawn. A lot of mining work was moved to a new tunnel that the journals only called the Eastern Passage. This tunnel went off the usual mineral veins. The Eastern Passage followed a very specific path, going down at exactly 43 degrees and staying perfectly straight no matter what kind of rock it ran into. In the past, miners would have changed their course to follow coal seams or stay away from very dense rock formations. However, Solomon's orders, which were written down in work orders signed by him, said that the path must not change, no matter what got in the way. Miners were put into teams of 7 people who worked 7-hour shifts. They were told to stay completely quiet while they were in the passage. By the spring of 1938, small changes in the way people in the community went about their daily lives were clear. Harwick noticed that people in the area had started to coordinate their daily activities in an unusual way. She wrote, "They get up at exactly the same time. Even their walking pace is in sync." When I told Mrs. Talent this yesterday, she smiled in a distant way and said, "We hear the same rhythm now." Changes to the settlement's physical structure sped up throughout 1938. People started to pay more and more attention to the central stone pillar, and they often gathered around it in groups of 7. Harwick said that the plans for the new buildings defied conventional architectural understanding. She said that interior angles seemed wrong somehow, and that the rooms looked bigger on the inside than they come. Their outside dimensions should allow. Most homes had new cellars dug out, even though the rocky ground made this work very hard. We found pieces of Solomon's personal journal from this time that show he was writing about what he thought was progress toward a certain goal in a way that was becoming more and more obscure. He wrote in August 1938, "The resonance gets stronger. 7 points of contact have been made. Each day, more ships can hear the deep rhythm. The preparatory phase is going as the ancient guidance said it would. The compression layer is getting thinner. By 1939, Raven's Hollow had pretty much cut itself off from the outside world. The road to the settlement was purposely left to fall apart, with fallen trees and bridges that weren't kept up. Mail delivery was already hit or miss, but it stopped completely when a state census taker tried to get to the community in the spring of 1940. He said that armed men turned him away at a makeshift checkpoint 5 miles from the settlement. His official report, which is kept in the state archives, says that the men looked so thin that they were almost emaciated and spoke in old-fashioned, formal ways that didn't match the way people in the area spoke. As the community became more isolated, Solomon's role changed from just being a leader to something like a religious leader. At first, the council members were all equal, and gave advice on community issues. But over time, they started to be called the vessels in writing. People now called Solomon the conduit or just the voice. The Eastern Passage dug deeper and deeper into the mountain all through 1940. Miners who worked in its depths started to show strange changes in both their bodies and minds. Marcus Holloway, the settlement's doctor, kept medical records that showed that workers became very sensitive to light, their bones became denser, especially in the skull, and they developed a condition he called synchronized autonomic response. When they were close to each other, their heartbeats and breathing patterns were perfectly in sync. Holloway's notes about miners hearing voices from the rock face were probably the most worrying. Several workers said they heard a chorus of whispers coming from deeper in the mountain, always just out of reach of where they were digging. When Solomon was told about it, he reportedly nodded in agreement and said only, "They recognized their approaching vessels." The most disturbing story started in 1941, when Geneva Harwick tried to leave Ravens Hollow. Her detailed journal, which makes up almost half of the documents that were found, talks about how the residents were getting more and more paranoid and acting strangely. In February 1941, she wrote, "The people are changing. They talk about their neighbors with detached curiosity, as if they were looking at specimens. At night, I can hear them walking through the settlement in coordinated patterns from my window. Their lanterns move like fireflies in geometric shapes that seem to have meaning I can't figure out." Harwick noticed that the residents were starting to develop strange physical traits. Their movements became more fluid but also more mechanical. Their speech patterns changed to include strange pauses and rhythmic emphasis on certain syllables. And many of them reported having the same dream of going into welcome darkness. Most alarmingly, she saw that they had learned to communicate without speaking, showing what she called a hive awareness that let them coordinate complex tasks without talking. Harwick was going to leave in April, but she couldn't because she found out that the settlement's only vehicles had been systematically disabled. Fuel lines were cut, distributor caps were missing, and tires were slashed. She tried to leave on foot, but she got lost in the woods for 3 days before somehow making her way back to the edge of the settlement, even though she had been walking steadily downhill away from the mountains. When she got back, she wrote that Solomon didn't seem surprised to see her. Instead, he seemed to be expecting her. He said, "The mountains here have their own gravity. People from Ravens Hollow always come back." Harwick said that what happened next was a time when the community paid more attention. People she had known for years were now watching her with an unsettling group focus. Things in her house were moved around while she slept. The most disturbing thing was the whispering voices she started to hear coming from the walls at night. They all spoke in perfect unison, repeating phrases in a language she didn't know but somehow understood emotionally as invitations to descend. By the summer of 1941, Harwick had written down big changes in how the community acted. Residents talked less often, and when they did, their conversations were mostly about dreams, especially dreams about deep cave systems and what they called the breathing dark. Instead of going about their daily lives, they did what Solomon called alignment activities, which were long periods of standing still in geometric formations or synchronized breathing exercises that lasted for hours. The journals show that mining in the Eastern Passage sped up throughout 1942, with work going on all the time. Harwick never clearly identified the substance that was taken out, which was not coal as usual. She called it dark matter that seems to absorb rather than reflect lamplight, and she said that people who worked with it developed unique physical traits, such as hair that grayed too soon, skin that darkened around the eyes, and a strange stillness of expression. A sample of this substance, kept between 2 glass slides, was found along with the other materials. A scientific analysis performed in 1969 yielded inconclusive results, as researchers observed that the material displays characteristics that are inconsistent with established geological elements. The most puzzling thing was that the sample seemed to change its molecular structure when it wasn't being looked at, as if it was responding to being studied. When 2 lab technicians suddenly got bad migraines and reported having hallucinations of huge underground spaces, testing was stopped right away. While looking around a storage shed near the administrative building in October 1942, Harwick found something that made him very worried. There were dozens of glass containers under tarps that looked like soil samples from different depths. The labels showed depths from 50 feet to more than 1,000 feet. Her observations of the deepest samples were the most disturbing. She said they occasionally shift without any outside force and make almost imperceptible vibrations that make it uncomfortable to stand nearby. Next to these samples, she found maps that were very different from normal geological surveys. These maps didn't show mineral deposits or structural formations. Instead, they showed what looked like energetic patterns flowing through the mountains, with lines that came together at 7 specific points, with Raven's Hollow in the middle of this pattern. In Solomon's handwriting, there were notes about resonance nodes, compression thresholds, and awakening indicators. One map from August 1942 had a simple note that said, "The pattern completes. Emergence phase begins." The winter of 1942-1943 was a turning point for the community. Harwick's journal entries became more and more broken up, which could mean that his mental health was getting worse or that he was being very careful when he wrote. She observed that residents had commenced alterations to their residences, securing windows, erecting unconventional extensions with atypical angles, and excavating basement expansions that linked to an expanding network of tunnels beneath the settlement. Most worryingly, she recorded a pattern of people gathering in the central square every night at exactly midnight, standing still for exactly 7 minutes, and then going home without saying anything. During this time, Harwick noticed that Solomon was starting to change in strange ways that made him feel uneasy. His movements have become so smooth that they seem unnatural. She wrote, "His limbs bend at angles that should not be anatomically possible. His voice modulates between octaves within single sentences. Most disturbing is the change in his eyes. The pupils have expanded until almost no iris remains, and they reflect no light whatsoever, appearing as perfect voids in his increasingly gaunt face." The diet of the people in the community had also changed a lot. Harwick said that traditional meals were replaced by a grayish paste made from the material taken from the Eastern Passage and mixed with local fungi grown in the new basement spaces. She said that after switching to this diet, the residents needed a lot less sleep. Many of them seemed to be awake even while they were resting, with their eyes partially open and moving in sync. Raven's Hollow was almost completely changed by February 1943. The original buildings were still there, but they had been changed so much that they were hard to recognize. The main stone pillar had been turned into a bigger structure that Harwick called a geometrically impossible arrangement of stone slabs that appear to intersect in ways that violate normal three-dimensional space. People now spent hours every day touching this structure, standing with their palms and foreheads pressed against it. Mining records found at the site show that the Eastern Passage went down more than 1,000 feet, which is much deeper than what mining equipment of the time should have been able to do. Harwick's notes, which were becoming more and more disjointed, talked about machines that assemble themselves and tools that respond to thoughts instead of hands. Workers no longer used traditional mining methods. Instead, they used what she called resonant dissolution, which meant that the rock face would give way when approached with the right harmonic intention. Harwick's writing showed more and more fear by the spring of 1943. In Mart, she wrote, "They know I'm watching. Solomon spoke my private thoughts aloud today, things I have never told anyone else. He described the recurring dream I've had since I was a child, the one about the staircase that goes down forever, with perfect accuracy. When I showed my shock, he just smiled and said, 'The mountain dreams through all of us now.'" Harwick's last try to get away from Raven's Hollow was in April 1943. Her plan, which she wrote down in great detail over several pages, was to leave during what the community had started calling the breathing. This was a nightly ritual in which all the residents would breathe in and out at the same time for about 30 minutes. She got a few things together and planned a route that would take her along a seasonal creek bed so she wouldn't get lost in the woods. On the 17th of April 1943, her journal ends suddenly with a hastily written note that says, "They're coming. I hear them outside. Not walking. Gliding. The sound is wrong. The sound is wrong. If found, tell the authorities what happened here. The Eastern Passage must be sealed. What they've awakened is..." But this isn't all we know about Raven's Hollow. Investigators found more journals in a rusty metal box that was hidden in the collapsed chimney of what they thought was Geneva Harwick's house. These pages were written in a style that was very different from her earlier entries. The letters were more angular, and there was strange spacing between words. They went on for almost 6 months after she was thought to have been captured. The first entry, which was written on the 24th of April 1943, starts with a disturbing sentence. "I understand now. I was fighting for no reason. The mountain has always known me. It has waited for me to come here. We all wait and listen." The next entries talk about how Harwick seemed to fit in with what she now called the collective awareness. She said that she was taken to the Eastern Passage the night she tried to escape, which was about 1,200 feet below the surface. She said that Solomon and the council members did what she called the opening ritual there. This involved putting on a paste made from a strange substance that had been taken from the deepest parts of the mine. She wrote, "They put it on my temples, forehead, and the back of my head. The feeling was immediate, a humming vibration that went through bone and tissue, resonating with something that was already there but dormant inside. I felt my thoughts expand outward, connecting with others, like tributaries, joining a vast underground river. Beneath it all, the ancient consciousness stirred, reaching upward through layers of compressed time." The entries from May to July 1943 show how the community's activities were becoming more organized. Harwick, who now seemed to be a willing participant, talked about how the tunnel system under the settlement was getting bigger, with residents working together in perfect silence. She said, "We don't need to talk out loud anymore. Thoughts flow between us, like water finding its level. Only Solomon keeps his own speech, acting as the voice of what grows below." By August, Harwick's writing had become almost clinical as she wrote about how residents' bodies were changing. She wrote, "Our bodies change to better serve as conduits. Blood chemistry changes to match the resonance frequencies. During breathing sessions, brain activity syncs up across all members. People with more flexible neural structures adapt the fastest to the old patterns." Her descriptions of what she called the manifestation phenomenon, which she first saw in late August, are the most disturbing. She wrote, "It started with shadows that moved on their own. Then there were reflections in windows and still water that did things seconds before the person reflected. Now, more and more, we see temporary duplications, copies of community members appearing briefly in places far from their physical bodies, doing things before disappearing back into the collective." Most of the entries from September are about Solomon Blackwood's health getting worse and his influence seeming to grow. Harwick said he was hollowing out because he had stopped eating completely but seemed to have more energy. His eyes have changed completely. The pupils have grown so big that there is no white left and they reflect nothing. He doesn't talk to us directly as much anymore, but his thoughts are getting louder and louder in the collective. He is becoming more vessel than man. The most disturbing entries are from early October, when Harwick wrote about what she called the first emergence. She said that on October 7, during a long breathing ritual that involved the whole community gathering in the central square, something appeared in their midst, a shape she had trouble describing clearly. It took up space without moving air. She wrote, "Shapes that can't exist in 3 dimensions folded and unfolded inside it. The people closest to it lost consciousness for a short time as it passed through them. Solomon went up to it without fear and reached out with his hands. He stood still for 17 minutes, and sometimes his body became see-through, showing his bones for a short time before becoming solid again. When it was over, he didn't talk to us with his voice. He talked to us with the voice of the mountain, which was deep, resonant, ancient, and impossible to understand." The message she wrote down was a series of instructions for the next step in what was now clearly a long-term plan. The compression layer thins. The awakening accelerates. Prepare the vessels for translation. The surface time ends. The deep time begins. We rise through you. You descend through us. The boundaries dissolve. Harwick's last clear entry, from the 19th of October, 1943, talks about a community that is almost done changing. She wrote, "We are becoming something other than human. The physical forms stay as anchors, but our consciousness goes beyond them. Solomon hasn't been seen in physical form for 3 days, but his presence is in every molecule of air and every grain of soil. The Eastern Passage now goes over 2 miles into the heart of the mountain, reaching the ancient chamber. Tomorrow, we all go down for the final communion. What comes out will wear our faces, but it won't be us, not as we were. We will be the eyes, ears, and voice of something vast and patient that has been waiting in darkness since before the first human drew breath. The last line of the journal is written in a script that is so distorted that it is hard to tell that it is Harwick's hand. It says, "We are the mountain now, and it is us." The mystery grows when a second journal is found that seems to have been written by more than one person. All of the entries are signed, "The Vessel." This document, which covers the years from November 1943 to March 1953, tells the story of how the community changed into what they called the distributed body of an entity they called the Ancient Awareness. Early entries talk about how the physical settlement of Raven's Hollow was slowly taken apart as people moved to a huge room deep inside the mountain that could only be reached through the Eastern Passage. Buildings weren't destroyed. Instead, they were translated. This process was never fully explained, but it seems that the physical structures were somehow absorbed into the environment around them, leaving no visible ruins. The journal says that by 1945, the community no longer had permanent physical forms. One entry says, "We manifest as needed." The body is just a temporary tool for interacting with the surface world. Our real existence flows through stone and soil, water and air. We perceive through all matter in our expanding domain. We are becoming the mountain's sensorium. In 1947, there were reports of a hunting party that found what looked like an abandoned settlement. The journal says surface visitors encountered projection today. Settlement facade maintained for their observation. One recognized the invitation and remained. Others fled. The receptive one's integration proceeds well. His consciousness already joins the collective flow. His physical form will be maintained as a surface anchor until no longer required. The most frightening parts talk about what the writers called the expansion protocol, a plan to spread their power beyond Raven's Hollow and into other areas. 7 new vessels are prepared each season, says a 1949 entry. They keep the same forms and are sent to nearby communities. They watch, listen, and look for people who might be able to resonate with them. When they are ready, they send out invitations through dreams. Those who are open to them follow the call back to our center, while those who are resistant are left alone. The Ancient Awareness advises patience, saying that everyone will join eventually as the compression continues. The last entries from early 1953 talk about how the community decided to stop all surface interactions for a time of deep integration. The settlement's physical traces were to be completely absorbed, leaving no signs for people who were interested. The last entry says, "We enter the silence phase. For 7 cycles, we will only be in the deeper awareness. This will strengthen the connection as the Ancient One awakens more quickly. When we come back, the expansion will happen with more purpose. The mountain dreams of the day, when all surface awareness joins its ancient knowing." The next piece of information that has been written down about Raven's Hollow comes from a U.S. The Geological Survey did this in 1953. Aerial photos show that the settlement seems to have been abandoned, with major structural damage and forest reclamation already happening. There was no follow-up ground investigation because the area was set aside for a national forest expansion. The recovered journals were kept sealed in government archives until 1967, when historian Dr. Margaret Voss asked to see them while she was studying mining communities in the Appalachian Mountains. Her next trip to Raven's Hollow in the summer of 1968 brought back more documents, such as broken mining records and parts of Solomon Blackwood's personal papers. One of the most important things they found was a hand-drawn map of the Eastern Passage that went much deeper into the mountain than any normal mining operation would allow. The notes in the margins, written in Solomon's unique style, talked about the ancient sleeper and voices from the compression layer. There were also calculations and measurements all over the document that seemed to keep track of something Solomon called awakening indicators. The pieces of what looked like a manifesto that explained Solomon's ideas about what was under the mountains were even more disturbing. He wrote, "The Appalachians are not just geological formations, they are compression layers of awareness. Consciousness has been under a lot of pressure over geological time, changing into something that is beyond human understanding. What sleeps below has dreamed for millions of years, and in its dreaming it has reached toward the surface. We who hear its call are not its masters, but its vessels, the means by which it extends perception into the surface world." Dr. Voss's expedition made one last discovery that can't be explained in a normal way. The research team found an unusual geological formation about 2 miles east of the abandoned settlement, in a place that matches the end of the Eastern Passage on Solomon's map. Voss wrote in her field notes that it was a perfect circle of bare earth, about 50 feet in diameter, without any plants. Even though the forest around it is very lush, the ground inside this circle is noticeably warmer than the ground outside of it. And when you stand in the middle of it, you can feel a subtle vibration. The most strange thing about this area is that there is no sound at all. There are no bird calls, insect noises, or even the sound of wind blowing through trees. The next thing Dr. Voss found, which was only written down in her private notes and not in the official expedition record, was a series of footprints that looked like they belonged to people leaving the circle. These footprints started in the middle of the formation and went outward, as if someone had appeared at that spot. She was even more disturbed by the fact that the footprints changed over time, starting out looking like human footprints, but becoming more and more distorted with each step. The last prints looked like elongated impressions with too many articulation points to be human digits. The Voss expedition was the last known time that people went to Ravens Hollow. In 1969, the area was officially named an ecologically sensitive habitat, which meant that no one else could go there. Dr. Voss herself stopped her research not long after that and took a job at a university in New Zealand. She is said to have refused to talk about her findings with her coworkers. The official record doesn't say anything about Dr. Voss's behavior getting more and more strange in the months after the expedition. Her coworkers noticed that she was becoming more and more obsessed with geological anomalies. She put multiple seismographs in her home and would press her ear to the ground for long periods of time, saying she could hear the deep rhythm. After a worrying incident in which campus security found her standing still in the geology department's storage room at 3:17 a.m., surrounded by rock samples arranged in a precise circular pattern, she moved to New Zealand. A series of small earthquakes hit the area around the old settlement in 1972. Seismologists saw strange wave patterns that made them think the tremors came from much deeper than normal for the area. After these things happened, the U.S., the Forest Service, set up a permanent no-go zone around Ravens Hollow because the mine tunnels were unstable and there was a chance of sinkholes. What the official records don't say, but what local Forest Service workers have passed down through word of mouth, is that after each tremor, search and rescue teams responded to reports of lost hikers who all told the same story. They saw eerily silent people walking through the forest who would stand still until the hikers left. Every description matched people who used to live in Ravens Hollow, as seen in old photos, even though there had been no signs of human habitation in the area for decades. Reports from a geological survey team that went into the restricted zone for a short time in 1976 to check for landslide risks were even more troubling. It seemed like groundwater was moving in sync throughout the whole area, rising and falling every 7 minutes like the breathing of a huge organism. The lead technician said that their audio equipment picked up voices speaking in perfect unison from below the ground. However, when the recordings were looked at later, they only showed low-frequency vibrations that were too low for humans to hear. The team's first report, which was never officially filed but kept by the lead geologist, included a worrying observation. The whole area seems to be changing at the molecular level in a slow but measurable way. Rock samples taken from different depths show strange crystalline structures that seem to be organizing themselves into patterns that look like neural networks. The most worrying thing is that these patterns seem to be spreading out from a central point near the location of the abandoned settlement at a rate of about 3.7 inches per year. In 2002, after Dr. Voss died, her personal belongings were sorted through, and the last piece of this disturbing puzzle came to light. There was a sealed envelope in her papers that said Ravens Hollow, Final Observations, not for publication. Inside was a single page that looked like a transcription. Voss had written at the top, "Audio recorded at Site B, Eastern Passage Terminal Point, the 12th of June 1968, 3:17 a.m., captured on equipment that was not working at the time." The transcribed text was a single phrase that seemed to be spoken by more than one voice. "The compression awakens, we are its breath. Its eyes open, we are its vision. The Ancient One stirs, we are its body. Depth becomes height, below becomes within. It rises through us, we rise through it." What Voss wrote at the bottom of the page was more revealing. "I dream of the chamber now, every night. Deeper down, they stand in circles, watching me descend. Solomon at the center, eyes like pieces of the void. They're waiting for me. They've always been waiting. The mountain knows my name." A second envelope, smaller and sealed with wax, had a short letter inside that said, "To whoever continues this research," and a small vial of dark powder. The letter, which was written just 2 weeks before Voss suddenly decided to leave the country, said, "I found this substance in a container marked Communion in the ruins of the administrative building. I've experienced its effects. The dreams are more than dreams. They're waiting for more vessels. Destroy this. Burn it. Then salt the earth where the ashes fall. What sleeps below is waking." A co-worker of Voss's secretly analyzed the powder in 1994, but never published the results. They found that it contained organic compounds that had a molecular structure that had never been seen before in scientific literature. The most alarming thing was that the substance seemed to be self-organizing at a microscopic level, with particles forming patterns that looked like neural networks when they were left alone for a few hours. The researcher who handled the sample reported even more worrying effects. In private letters, he talked about having dreams that bothered him and made him feel like being watched through my own eyes. He said it was getting harder to stay focused during the day, and he often found himself standing still and staring at the nearest mountain range without meaning to. The last letter in the correspondence is a frantic one that says, "It's in my thoughts now. I can feel others listening when I think. My dreams connect to theirs. I find myself writing words I don't mean. The mountain is calling." According to records from the Forest Service, controlled burns were done all around Ravens Hollow in 2003, supposedly as part of regular forest management. Later satellite images show that the area is now covered by a new-growth forest that is unusually thick and seems to be spreading in a circular pattern from where the settlement used to be. What official reports don't say is that the burn was ordered because there were a lot of missing persons cases in the area between 1998 and 2002. In a 20-mile radius of the old settlement, 17 hikers, hunters, and campers went missing. In all of these cases, search teams gave up after reporting equipment problems, getting lost, and what several members described as seeing themselves walking in the opposite direction through the forest. The pattern that showed up when these disappearances were mapped is probably the most disturbing. They made a perfect spiral around the spot where Ravens Hollow was, as if something was methodically reaching out in a planned way. The controlled burn did not destroy any of the influence that came from the old settlement. In fact, it seems to have sped up its spread. Botanical studies of the area, done from a distance with drones to avoid direct contact with people, have shown that the new plants are growing at rates never seen before and have strange traits. Plants move in sync with each other, regardless of the wind, and trees grow in geometric patterns that botanists say exhibit almost architectural intention. The behavior of animals in the area has also changed a lot. Cameras that turn on when they see motion around the edge of the restricted area have recorded deer, bears, and birds of different kinds standing in perfect circles at night, especially at 3:17 a.m. The most disturbing thing is recordings of different species moving in perfect time, as if they were being controlled by one central intelligence. Even today, hikers and hunters sometimes say they feel lost when they pass through the area. They say they feel like they're being watched and have trouble keeping track of which way they're going, even with a compass. People say that electronic devices break down more often than usual. People who camp nearby keep having vivid shared dreams about going down endless staircases into the depths of the mountains, where something big and old breathes in perfect rhythm with the dreamers. This is probably the most disturbing thing. In 2019, a small private research team with advanced ground-penetrating radar tried to map the structures below the surface around the old settlement. Their initial results, which were never officially published but leaked through academic channels, showed that there was a large network of tunnels that was much bigger than any known mining operation could explain. The most disturbing thing they found was that the tunnels seemed to be getting bigger, with new passages forming at a rate that was normal for geological processes but shouldn't happen in human timeframes. The team's last report, which they sent to their university sponsors before the project was abruptly canceled, included a disturbing observation. The tunnel system forms a pattern consistent with bronchial structures in human lungs, converging on a large central chamber approximately 2,200 feet below the surface. Acoustic monitoring indicates rhythmic movement of air through these passages at 7-minute intervals. The entire mountain appears to be breathing. 3 weeks after coming back from the field, Dr. Abigail Cara, the head of the research team, went missing. Her coworkers said that in the days leading up to her disappearance, she had been having vivid dreams and the unsettling feeling that someone else was looking through my eyes. Her last email, sent at 3:17 a.m., the night she disappeared, she wrote only one line. "I understand what Geneva and Margaret found. The mountain is calling me home." In early 2023, a group of climatologists studying the weather in a certain area made an unexpected discovery. Time-lapse satellite images showed that the clouds above the restricted area acted strangely. For example, they formed and broke up in 7-minute cycles directly over the site of the old settlement. Their readings of the composition of the atmosphere were even more worrying. They showed that unidentified particles were being released into the air at regular intervals. These particles stayed in the air longer than natural atmospheric dust and seemed to move in specific directions instead of following the wind. One researcher, who later asked to be moved to a different project, said they saw these particles through a microscope and thought they saw microstructures that looked like simplified neural networks inside them. His unofficial hypothesis, disclosed solely to trusted colleagues, posited that the particles could operate as a distributed sensor network, effectively an atmospheric nervous system, enhancing the perceptual range of entities situated beneath the mountain. The official stance of both state and federal authorities is that Ravens Hollow was merely another unsuccessful mining community, one of numerous such settlements that characterized the Appalachian region in the early 20th century. Most public records of its existence have been destroyed, and it can only be found in the personal collections of specialized historians and the few journal fragments that private collectors have kept. But local folklore tells a different story. People who live within 50 miles of the restricted zone talk in hushed tones about the Hollow people, who are sometimes seen standing still among trees far away, watching silently before appearing to sink into the ground. They tell stories of hikers who come back from the deep woods, looking a little different. They talk less, sleep with their eyes partially open, and spend a lot of time outside at night looking at the mountains. Some people who live nearby say that on very quiet nights, when there is no wind to carry the sounds of the forest, they can feel a slight vibration through the ground, like the breathing of something huge, with a 7-minute cycle of rising and falling pressure. People who have lived there for a long time say that sleeping on the ground near the restricted area is dangerous because the mountain listens through the soil, and what you dream there dreams you back. But the reports from the few remaining descendants of the original Ravens Hollow families, those whose ancestors left before Solomon Blackwood came back in 1937, are probably the most disturbing. They talk about a dream that has been passed down through their families for generations. In this dream, their relatives stand embedded in stone walls in a huge chamber deep beneath the mountains. Their eyes are open and aware, and their mouths move in unison as they speak the thoughts of something old and patient that is slowly growing upward through layers of rock toward the surface world. In 2023, there was strange seismic activity in the area, with epicenters forming a pattern that seismologists can't explain using standard tectonic models. Animals in the area have also changed their behavior. For example, their migration patterns have changed so that they completely avoid the restricted zone. This has created what ecologists call a dead corridor through an otherwise healthy forest. Researchers studying this phenomenon have put up trail cameras that have sometimes caught images of people walking through the forest at night. When these images are enhanced and analyzed, they look like pictures of Ravens Hollow residents from the 1,930 seconds, including Solomon Blackwood himself. The timestamps on these pictures are the most disturbing part. They show that the figures stay completely still for exactly 7 minutes at a time before moving again. In the most recent recorded event, a Forest Service ranger patrolling the edge of the restricted area in early 2024 saw a group of 7 people standing in a perfect circle in a small clearing. As he got closer, they all turned to face him at the same time. Their faces looked like they were part of the forest, with bark-like textures covering their features and fungi growing from their eye sockets. But their eyes were clear and aware. The ground beneath the circle seemed to soften before he could react, and the figures slowly sank into the earth, keeping eye contact until they were gone. The ranger, hospitalized shortly thereafter for what was officially recorded as acute stress reaction, repeatedly told attending medical staff that he could hear them thinking inside my head and that they're still watching through my eyes. He was transferred to a psychiatric facility after attempting to dig through the hospital floor, claiming he needed to return to the deep chamber where they're waiting. His current whereabouts and condition remain classified. Local doctors have found that a statistically significant number of patients are having the same dreams, especially ones that involve going downstairs, huge underground chambers, and ancient voices speaking through stone. Community records show that residents are moving their homes closer to the mountains in an unusual way. They often rebuild on land that isn't as good for building on for no reason other than feeling drawn to the higher ground. Building permits show a disturbing trend in architecture. Homes with strange interior angles, basements that are too deep, and what one building inspector called redundant spaces that serve no apparent function, but are a big part of the designs. Some people think that Ravens Hollow was never really abandoned, and that the community didn't go away but instead changed, becoming part of something bigger and more mysterious than human society. The small changes seen in communities closest to the restricted zone may be the most worrying. People who live there say that more and more people are waking up, going to bed, and doing things at the same time without meaning to. They say that what Solomon Blackwood found deep in those old mountains wasn't a thing, but a process. A slow awakening that started millions of years ago and sped up as it got closer to being finished. The most disturbing theory, put forth by a geologist who only studied the area for a short time before switching fields, is that the Appalachian Mountains, which are some of the oldest mountain ranges on Earth, may have a form of awareness that humans can't understand. Not consciousness as we understand it, but a gradual, deliberate mode of cognition functioning on geological timescales, with thoughts that may require centuries to develop and millennia to finalize. In this reading, Solomon Blackwood didn't find something in the mountains. The mountains found something in him, a potential conductor for speeding up their old processes. The community was no longer victims. They were willing participants in a change that was beyond human understanding. The most disturbing part of this theory is that the strange things that happen around Ravens Hollow have been slowly spreading outward for decades, forming a circle of influence that grows by about 100 feet each year. If this trend keeps going, it will reach the nearest community that is currently inhabited by around 2078. The mystery is still there, though. The journals are locked away in private collections, and the forest is taking back the physical evidence. Deep beneath the mountains, in darkness that has been undisturbed for eons, something ancient may be stirring, breathing in perfect rhythm with the scattered vessels of its awareness who still walk the surface, wearing human faces and always looking down, waiting for the day when what is below finally rises. The mountain takes a breath. People who are a part of it always come back. The layer of compression gets thinner. In the quiet between your own heartbeats, listen for the rhythm that comes from the oldest parts of the world. 7 minutes up, 7 minutes down. We are the breath of the Ancient One.